morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the second Bitcoin Cash Difficulty Adjustment Algorithm Developer Meeting of 2020. And I'm going to just run through an introduction, and I'm going to be reading it, and so bear with me while I do this. After a 2-hour first meeting, the meeting participants agreed it would be good to schedule a follow-up meeting about 10 days after that meeting. As we agreed, this would probably help parties find solutions and the best ways to go forward. We started scheduling this meeting hours after the first meeting finished. As chair of this meeting, I will try to stay neutral in these discussions. The problem at hand is one that is for the experts to solve. We are here to offer the opportunity for professionals to discuss things in a more face-to-face setting during a structured meeting. The outcome is not one that we control or aim to control. We merely aim to assist all here present to communicate in a professional and constructive way as you work on the future of Bitcoin Cash. And then I'm just going to jump to the reason for the meeting today is to discuss progress in developing, reviewing, and implementing a new BCH DAA in the different implementations. The first meeting's goal was to discuss large Bitcoin Cash block confirmation time variants, possible solutions, and work being done. The second follow-up meeting, this one, was scheduled to discuss progress in developing, reviewing, and implementing a new BCH DAA in the different implementations. The format for the meeting today will be, and I'll just, rules of engagement and the code of conduct. Again, the work group code of conduct is applicable and therefore posted below the agenda. As most were present during the first meeting, I will not read it again. Those that were not present on the 16th, please take a moment to look at it. It basically says, be civil. I think that's about it. So the format for the meeting is the same as before. We put together an agenda that we propose. It is up to the meeting participants to agree with this agenda or to amend it before accepting it. We will again do this after the introductions have taken place. So without any further ado, I'm going to go for my top left, Mr. Scott Roberts, Zowie. Could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Zowie. I'm known for working on difficulty algorithms.
Thank you, sir. And next I have Jonathan Toomim.
I'm Jonathan Toomim. I like working on hard problems and what's harder than difficulty.
Not much. That's a good one. Next, Jacob Elliosoff.
Hey, Jacob Elliosoff. I run a small cryptocurrency investment fund. I have a background and interest in algorithms, and particularly in DAAs. And BCH is where the DAA action is these days. So I've been following and trying to chip in.
Great, thank you, Jacob. Next, Antony Zegers.
Hey, I'm Antony Zegers. I work on Bitcoin ABC, and I have an interest in difficulty algorithms also.
Great, thank you, Antony. Next is Chris.
Yeah, I'm Chris Pacia from BCHD.
Great, thank you, Chris. Amaury.
I'm Amaury Sechet. I'm the lead developer of Bitcoin ABC.
Thank you, Amaury. Jason.
Hey there, I'm Jason Dreyzehner. I'm working on bitauth.com, and I'll be presumably implementing a JavaScript implementation for an SPV wallet of whatever's discussed here.
Great, thank you, Jason. Next, I have Freetrader, and I'll be reading Freetrader's remarks. Hi, I'm Freetrader, lead maintainer of Bitcoin Cash node BCHN, a full node implementation of Bitcoin Cash. And then finally, we have Andrew Stone.
Hi, Andrew Stone from Bitcoin Unlimited.
Great, thank you, Andrew. All right, I'm going to go over the agenda just so that we can get acceptance of it. So the primary discussion items are A, previous meeting. Is there anything participants want to bring forward about the first meeting and its video? B, development. What has been happening between the meeting on July 16th and today's meeting? Under that item, I have a note from Freetrader who would like to add concerns about recent unilateral announcements by ABC. Item number C, solutions. What are the options on the table and what is known and not known about them? And again, I have a request from Freetrader. What are the ramifications of drift compensation? Which is a question I've heard a lot. D, testing and research. What tests are done and what still needs additional research and testing? And E, going forward, what is the path forward from here? Is there anybody that would like to make any suggestions or additions to that agenda? Hearing none, I'm going to assume that that agenda has been accepted. So that's a rather bold move on my part. So let's dive in. Let's start with A, the previous meeting. Is there anything that participants want to bring forward about the first meeting and its video? Jonathan.
I just wanted to mention that it seems that there was a miscommunication or something that was unsaid in the last video. When Amaury was bringing up the drift, he said that previous DAAs have had drift and that is a problem, and that we should consider that as part of the problem to be solved. He did not say that correcting for that historical drift or reversing that drift was part of the problem. So I did not object to it at that time because I do believe that DAAs should not drift. They should not create more drift. But I was not agreeing to the correction of historical drift. And I think that that was, something that should have probably been addressed more clearly. If Amaury had considered that to be a requirement, then he should have been more clear about making sure that it was the historical drift that we were all agreeing to correct.
All right, so I'm going to just ask for you guys to raise your hands when you want to speak to an issue. So is there anybody that would like to speak to what Jonathan just said?
Yes, I can speak to that. Well, in my view, like drift is an issue. And the problem is that if we correct drift based on any other reference point than the Genesis block, we're effectively redefining the policy for coin emission. And I mean, this is not something we want to be doing if we want to, like, keep the trust into the fact that BCH is hard money.
Jonathan?
Why don't we let Chris go?
Oh, I mean, I was just going to say, I understand where Amaury's coming from, but, you have to remember too, we forked off of BTC, and at the point we forked, there was already a lot of drift and extra coins, or we were ahead of schedule with really no hope of compensating for that without changing the algorithm, right? So it's kind of, I kind of took it, and I think a lot of other people took it as like, that's just how Bitcoin works, and we just happen to be ahead of the schedule, and that's just the way things are. I don't know. I mean, like, correcting for it is, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting idea, but it's not something that, like, I don't think any of us really were considering, before like this discussion came up, because that's just kind of how things always were.
Jonathan?
So as a direct reply to Amaury's point of if we're going to be defining the schedule, it should always be based on the Genesis block. Well, for a very long time, we've been defining our emission schedule based on the block 146 blocks ago, or based on the block 2016 blocks ago. So BTC and BCH have basically never used the Genesis block in terms of defining the emission schedule. It's always been a recursive thing. So if we're going to be making it absolute based on a fork block, that's not really very different from making it recursive based on a block a day ago.
All right, I have a comment from Freetrader. He says, I agree with what has been said that the requirement for drift correction was not really ratified by participants in the last meeting. I'm not aware of who asked for this correction except Amaury and ABC. Could I get a show of hands if you want to say something, please? Jacob.
Yeah, I'll just maybe a slightly different angle that, like, from my perspective, the reason there has been a lot of discussion, as I understand it, about the DAA and BCH over the last 2.5 years, whatever, was largely because of the oscillations and the bad confirmation times and the poor distribution of block times. If everything had been the same, but the block times had been smooth 10-minute average throughout that period, some shorter, some longer, along a reasonable distribution, as far as I know, we wouldn't even be talking about the DAA. Like, that to me is the motivation for a lot of the digging that's happened. So maybe there are other, I mean, I'm sure Amaury is aware of conversations that I'm not. Like, probably people have brought up DAA problems that did not involve the oscillations and the poor distribution, but those are the only motivations for the DAA discussions I've been a part of.
Antony?
Well, I guess I'll just kind of like comment on what Amaury said, like, and what everyone else said. Like, basically, like, things like what Jonathan said was, okay, we've always had, you know, we've always used different blocks as a reference, but that's because, like, it has drifted also. So, like, what you're talking about is saying, okay, we're going to have an algorithm that doesn't drift, and then we're going to, like, it'll end up being a block that's some random block will be a reference for that. So I think that's kind of a different situation. Like, if you're going to have drift correction or drift control, then you have to reference something. And all Amaury's saying is, like, we shouldn't arbitrarily be, you know, choosing a new reference point. So I mean, I kind of think that you're talking about two different things, basically.
Good. Jonathan, I've got a comment from Freetrader. He says, agree 100% with Jacob's description of the problem. So, Jonathan?
I wouldn't call it so much arbitrary as the block immediately prior to activating assert. The current Assert3 code that Freetrader and I and a few others have been working on uses the block before the fork, the November 15th, 2020 fork, as the reference block. So it says basically whatever has happened in the past is in the past, it's done, and no more drift will happen. I don't think that that's so much of an arbitrary decision as it is like a very logical and specific decision. There's also another Schelling point. It doesn't have to be the most recent block. There's another Schelling point of the Genesis block. And I think that, like, yeah, choosing between those two, in terms of arbitrariness, they're both equally arbitrary or non-arbitrary. And so decisions between those two options should be made on other terms, such as what effects they would have on Bitcoin Cash as a currency, as a means of exchange, et cetera.
Just 1 second, Jacob. I've got another comment from Freetrader. He said, I also agree drift correction and the issue addressed primarily by the DAA problem statement developed so far are two different things. So, Jacob?
Yeah, I do have a comment, although maybe before that, like, if anyone, if maybe Amaury or Antony wants to respond first before we sort of pile on here, I don't know.
Okay.
I guess I could. I don't have that much more to add. I guess my way of thinking about it, another way of thinking about it is, like, think about, like, 10 years in the future. Like if you effectively have drift correction based on some block in the past, like, why not have it be the Genesis block? That seems more, instead of some block that happens to be right around now. I don't know. I don't have a strong, like, thing about it.
I've got another comment from Freetrader that I think I'd like to get out first. Carol T states this as well in his description of the drift solution, which I understand it went to the Grasberg algo. Can someone confirm? And go ahead.
Carol's proposal did also include a drift correction that is similar to Grasberg's, yes.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to take the quick moment to introduce Josh Ellithorpe.
Hello, everybody. Just sorry I'm a little bit late. I had some other meetings, but nice to attend, and I'll be quiet for a second.
It'll be deducted from your pay. Okay, Jacob.
Right, so to get back to my comment. So Yeah, what I wanted to highlight is that we can sort of separate. I think there are two questions which are technically separate. And if I'm wrong, we should sort that out first. So one question is, which block is referenced by the code? So as I understand it, Jonathan's current code refers to the block before the fork and so on, or the difficulty of the block before the fork or something like this, or the time of the block. But it seems to me that ACERT, for instance, you could write the code so that it would work exactly the same, that users would observe no difference whatsoever, and make it refer to the Genesis block instead. So to me, the question of like, which block is the reference block is a bit of a non sequitur as I understand it. What I see as the real crux, like the point where there is actual disagreement, is whether you should be drifting back to an average block time of 10 minutes since some recent block or since Genesis. That I understand is like a natural difference of opinion. So I just think talking about, maybe that's what people mean when they talk about reference block. I just want to make it clear that the ACERT algorithm, for instance, and other algorithms could be coded in such a way that the only block it referenced was the Genesis block. I don't think there's a problem.
The problem with that is that if you did that, then difficulty for the next block would immediately go to some absurdly high value. Like,
no, I don't think that's true. I think we have a technical disagreement there.
Oh, do we? Okay.
And I just want to add in, Freetrader says, okay, so my question to Manjurian, all well and good about considering the long term, but has anyone done a cost benefit assessment of the having 12.5% longer block times for 5 years or so?
But it doesn't change very much in practice because, I mean, like 10 minutes is what you're going to expect online. 11 minutes is not going to change very much. And for, face-to-face interaction, it doesn't change very much either. Like, in both cases, it says we're fast enough or way, way too slow. And we're still stuck in, those kind of value where it doesn't impact any actual use case very much.
Okay, and I've got a hand up from Jonathan.
I disagree. I think that I've seen a lot of people complain about BCH be slow in the use case of depositing to exchanges. And in that use case, they require, say, 6 confirmations or 12 confirmations, whatever their exchange requires. And that takes currently somewhere between 30 minutes and like 6 hours. Fixing the DAA will bring that down to something between maybe 1 hour and 3 hours. But fixing the DAA and also adding a 12.5% positive drift will change that to something between 1 hour, 10 minutes and 3 hours, 30 minutes. That is going to be a small but substantial slowdown. And it will be something that always causes BCH to be in total about 18% slower than BTC for confirmations instead of 6% slower.
But by that argument, you could say, let's just shorten the block time to 8.5 minutes, and then, then we'll do even better. Just sort of.
Right. So I think that there is some optimal block time for a proof of work based cryptocurrency. I do not think that it is 10 minutes. I think that it is less than 10 minutes. I think that it depends a lot on block propagation times, especially the speed of light, first byte latency of block propagation, and that it's probably somewhere between 2 to 5 minutes. If we were moving the block time in the direction that I think were more optimal for the user experience balanced against throughput, then I think that that would be possibly a good thing. But we're moving it in the opposite direction, and I think that that's bad.
All right, I'm just going to remind you again. I'm just going to remind you again to raise your hands if you're going to talk. And I think, Scott, you had your hand up? No.
I didn't have my hand up, but I wanted to say something. I just did a quick calculation, and if a cert were to start from the Genesis block, it would naturally want to be 17,000 blocks ahead of schedule. I don't know how many blocks were lost due to the EDA, but Antony and Jacob had a little disagreement. So whatever that difference is how many would apparently make the difficulty go up. That's all.
Thank you, Scott. And I did have another hand up prior to this, Amaury.
Yes. The point I was making is that there is no significant use case that, 2 hours or 2 hours and 15 minutes, impact dramatically. And in fact, due to variance, as you point out, it's like 1 to 3 hour or 1 hour and 10 to 3 hour and 30 or something like that. So the variance is like way bigger than the actual number we are talking about. And we are very cognizant of that. I mean, like, this is why we have pre-consensus in the roadmap, because we know that this is way too slow, but this is not way too slow even by a quantitative number. It's way too slow because it's in the wrong category of number, if I may. Like, it's not technically correct to say it, but like this is way off. There is no way we can shave off this number enough so that we end up in the right bucket. That's the point I'm making. So we need to roll out some other tech there. We know that already. That's not new.
Thank you, Amaury. Next is Josh Ellithorpe.
So there's a couple things that I think aren't immediately obvious that I just want to be able to bring up, right? Like, it seems like a small change from like 10 to 11 minutes. That's a 10% increase in the amount of delay before a vendor like BitPay, and that's additional volatility in the price that makes it difficult for them to offer a service for instant conversion and increases their risk. So I would love to hear what a business like them has to say about a 10% difference. It also mildly aggravates the deposit use case that Jonathan Toomim was talking about, but also the change transaction limit that many people were bumping up against already that was recently increased. It's a small bump down there as well. And then with the smart contracts, the predictability of a time lock contract would be impacted. Now they would have to say, oh, well, the time lock contract's about 11 minutes now, and in 5 years, it's going to be normalized and it's going to be 10 minutes. And instead, I think it makes a lot of sense to be consistent on what those contracts are going to be from a fork date onwards, without having to worry about a calculation as how that changes over time. That adds a lot of additional complexity to long-running smart contracts, and there's just a lot of small pieces that have a minor user experience bump by extending it by that extra minute. What I'm curious about is what the strong argument for the benefit is, because I see a lot of minor downsides, but I'd like to know what the strong upside is that justifies those minor downsides for existing. And I'd love for people to talk about that.
Okay, just before you go, just before I acknowledge Amaury, another comment from Freetrader. There are use cases such as Mencinas who are affected, generally smart contracts which rely on the algo targeting the ideal block time established by Satoshi. And Amaury, you're next.
Yeah, so for most of those stuff, I would agree with Josh, except for the smart contract part of it, because if there is two ways to lock contract in Bitcoin. You can lock by blockade or you can block by time. And if you expect your contract to be unlocked at a specific time, then you should be unlocking by time, because right now there is drift and there is variance in the way blocks are found. So if you expect a block at a certain age to happen at a certain time, your smart contract is already busted. That's not something that is impacted, I'd say, by that change. But for the other points, I would agree with Josh. Now the flip side of that is that every change that we made to Bitcoin Cash, we need to look at what are the pillars and the values of the project, right? And the pillars of BCH are, on one side, that it needs to be a good medium of exchange, meaning like fast, cheap, reliable transactions. And on the other end, it needs to be hard money. That's really the two big value of BCH, like the two big characteristics that we are looking out of the token that exist on that chain. And hard money. So if you want to be able to tell people that your stuff has hard money property, you must not change the emission policy of the coin willy-nilly, right? Because if you can start to change it, then maybe you can change it again tomorrow. So it needs to be a hard no. From my perspective, we must not move an inch on that front. It's just not part of the stuff that we should even be considering to touch. And so if we are going to do something that corrects a drift, then the only reference point that we can pick and that doesn't change, the emission policy as it was set at the origin of the project is to go on from the Genesis block.
Just before I get to show of hands, I think it's going to be Jonathan, Jacob, and Josh. But just before that, I've got Freetrader, who said the 10 minutes block target is quite strong shelling point in Bitcoin, smiley face. Stronger, I would say, than a rather small emission schedule drift in the large scheme of things. There's other comments coming in, but I think it's Jonathan first.
So 2 points. First point, isn't there an issue with doing time-based block times in which, because blocks can have some jitter in their block times, if you're doing a time-based block time, can't you have a block that makes a time-based block time permanently unspendable? Can't you double spend them with a reorg?
Who are you asking the question to?
Amaury, who was saying that there's a time-based method as well as the height-based method.
So let's let Amaury answer before we go to the next question.
Yeah, I would like, Jonathan, if that was possible, that you reformulate the question, because I'm not sure I understand exactly what you're asking.
Sorry, I don't remember this well enough to be specific. I'm just going to drop it.
Moving on to Jacob then, please.
Okay, maybe I can just address the way that works quickly. So
Sure.
there are operations in the script system that allows you to make a transaction unspendable up to either a certain 8 or a certain block time. Not block time, a certain MTP. And that's basically it. But once you've reached that MTP or once you reach that block 8, then the transaction is spendable. So obviously, if you have a big reorg, the transaction might be orphaned. But if you have big reorg, transaction might be orphaned anyway. So that doesn't change very much there. And the transaction will become spendable again, in a few blocks. So you can rebroadcast it when there is a big reorg.
Is it actually the block's median time passed and not the block's timestamp? So I think actually the issue that I've been remembering poorly.
Yeah, it's the median time passed.
Is that you could have a second block that makes the transaction unspendable again. So
no, it's not possible. There was this kind of problem with the original design from Satoshi that I think was never implemented properly anyway. But the way it ended up being actually implemented this is in fact why the medium time passed was introduced in the first place, and then it was used as a consensus rule to limit what kind of timestamp you can pick for a block, but that comes later. It actually was introduced for locking transactions.
So we have a number of people that have had their hands up, and I'm going to go around in order because I'm going to remember the order. Jacob first.
Yeah, just back to the question of sort of the fundamental principles of the coin that we don't want to, that we want to be inviolate, that we want to sort of be respected through any change like this. I think there are two that are in tension. One is that the average block time should be 10 minutes over history, so that after 20 years, the block time over those 20 years will have been about 10 minutes. And the other is that going forward from now, the average block time will be about 10 minutes. And those are in tension because, of course, in early days of Bitcoin, including I think in the first month of Bitcoin, weren't there some multi-day gaps between blocks while Satoshi was getting the software up and running and so on. So I think these are both reasonable things to try to hold sacred, but you can't hold them both sacred because they conflict. So then you have to think, okay, well, which one is more important? And also relatedly but separate, which one has a sort of deeper history in the ethos of Bitcoin, you know? And it seems to me like this would be interesting to go back into the historical conversations, but like, again, from the very start of Bitcoin, from 2009, 2010, there was already very significant drift. I'm not aware that Satoshi like took any measures about it. So it seems to me, isn't there an argument that the 10 minutes starting from now is more sacred to Bitcoin than the 10 minutes historical?
So I've got Josh, then Jason Dreyzehner, and then a comment from Freetrader. So Josh first.
So my question is really on the very same vein as the previous one from Jacob, is around the expectation of the coin. So we look at Bitcoin Cash's history. We see that there was the EDA. Everyone knows that the EDA did not work out well and dramatically changed the issuance schedule and issued a lot of extra coins quickly. And then we replaced that with a fix that did not try to address the drift issue either, but was trying to get to a more consistent future 10 block timing. And that was not contentious. And everybody worked on DAAs and one got merged. And now we're seeing issues with the oscillation of that. It seems that if the Schelling point was so strong around a historical 10-minute block, that should have been discussed during either of the two previous DAAs, and that we should have set a precedent then, rather than the third change being the one that introduces a new criteria. Because now we want to get to 10-minute blocks and we want to get rid of these oscillations. And even if we can get to 10-minute blocks, Bitcoin doesn't have 10-minute blocks. It has 9-minute and something blocks because of the increasing hash rate. And we already will be getting to more like the original Bitcoin emission schedule, which never was 10 minutes. It was, because of the hash rate increase, was always 9 minutes and change in order for them to produce blocks. By us going to 10 minutes, we are minorly adjusting for the drift already. And the difference is that the proposal that I see for the DAA proposed by ABC is that to take it to 11 minutes, which is an even more dramatic shift, and something that didn't have a lot of precedence on the last two DAAs and was not discussed, which is why I think a lot of people are surprised by this coming up now. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up as something that we should think about, as to, we've already gone through the process of replacing a DAA twice, and now we're getting a new requirement. And if it was so important a Schelling point, why wasn't that a requirement previously?
So just before, Amaury, I'm going to ask you to hold off for a sec because I've got a backlog of other comments. If you could write down what your comments are so you got them.
Go ahead and have Amaury go. I think I was next.
So no, I wanted to say something and then you decide if I continue or not. But if everybody say their stuff and then you get a response like all in one block, I think it's going to be very confusing. And I already started to take a paper to start taking notes so I can respond to the various questions. And so I think if we continue for much longer, it's going to be very confusing.
Yeah, I would go ahead and respond, Amaury. Because that was kind of direct between you and Josh.
Yeah, go for it.
Mine was on script stuff, and it's going to dislodge things even further.
and Antony and Freetrader both have comments for later. So Amaury, go ahead if you want to do this now.
Okay, yeah, so I wanted to respond as to why this was not brought up previously with various DAA change, and I think that's a very fair question. And the main difference that we have right now is that the various proposals on the table all include some kind of drift, like entry drift mechanism, if you wish, or some kind of mechanism that limits drift going forward. So now the question is on the table that what is the reference point to calculate that drift? And before that, all the proposals that we had did not include that concept. So it's kind of like a blind spot that we had, or maybe we didn't have proposals that were, we didn't have proposals that raised that question at all. Like if you don't have any reference point, then the question of what is your reference points doesn't ask itself. And And if we are to be honest, I think we should have asked that question at the time. And I think this was a blind spot on our side.
Okay. Antony had his hand up. Jason, you want to defer to Antony?
Oh, mine was just a minor point that that someone had brought up Mecenas and said it's affected, but Carol has a tweet that says it's based on MTP, so it's, I guess it's not affected by this. So
okay.
I posted the link to that in the chat.
Great, thank you, Antony. Yeah. Just before we come back to you, Jason, just because it's along the same notes, Freetrader said, why was this drift topic not brought up for consideration for earlier upgrades?
That was what Josh had. Freetrader clarified a few later. That was the same.
Yeah, yeah, I think the same answer applies there.
Okay, my previous question was basically made by Josh. Sorry, guys, you're a little bit ahead of me on this one. So Jason Dreyzehner, would you like to have a go at this?
Yeah, I just want to add on some of the script stuff. I don't think it affects any existing known public covenant setups. It is possible, though, for this to complicate certain types of scripts. Just to clarify, when you're checking time within a script in a transaction, you can only check against the lock time on the transaction. So you have to choose between whether or not you're checking a block time or checking with MTP, just in case for others who are not familiar with that. So in general, it would seem that they're never going to be used together. However, it is possible that I use to have two code paths within a script where you go down one branch of an if statement or another, and you lock against time or blocks, which sounds like a really strange and unusual use case. But honestly, there are only a few use cases that I personally think are particularly exciting for smart contracts, and they're usually things that are like game theory strategies for doing decentralized exchange stuff or prediction markets. And for especially for decentralized exchange things, if you have contracts that compare confirmation times or have code paths that could be based on confirmation time or code paths that could be based on block height, then you can get to a weird situation where you start to need to do calculations based on how long it's been with this drift correction algorithm. So there are esoteric use cases, none I believe public yet, but there are definitely some decentralized exchange situations where it gets more complicated based on it. But nothing that has been publicly published so far as I know.
I have Jacob and then Jonathan. Unless
I don't know, not me. I think.
Sorry, you put an FYI in the chat.
Oh yeah.
Regarding the average block time, do you want that read out?
Just so people know, if you look at the average block time from Genesis from 2009 till now, according to my calculations for BTC, the average block time is 9 minutes and 29 seconds, so 31 seconds off of 10 minutes. And for BCH, it's 9 minutes and 25 seconds, so 35 seconds off. That's not to make any point. It's just some information to have in the back of your mind.
Okay, and the next one I have is Jonathan.
Yeah, so all DAAs that have been done in cryptocurrency past have used the reference point as a recent block or the recent past. And it was always defined relatively, DAAs were always defined relatively based on the recent past. If we're going to be moving to an absolute method, I think that the reference point should also start as the recent past, and it should just be that one point. This has the same functionality to a relative definition using a recent past block. It has the same behavior. It has the same effects. So I think that we should do basically the same thing, but in a superior way.
All right. Do I have further comments on the drift?
Yeah.
That'd be Chris Pacia first, please, Scott. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of along the same sort of point I was making. You know, Satoshi's, we kind of had two different his implementation was different from what he was trying to achieve, right? So he's trying to achieve an emission schedule where blocks come out every 10 minutes. And that's kind of, everyone knows that from a high level, that's how Bitcoin is supposed to work. And then what he actually implemented failed to achieve that ideal. And so he actually implemented something that caused blocks to come out faster. And so I think the issue is like, which one of those original designs are we trying to meet? Is what was actually implemented or what like the goal was? Because that's a little bit of a problem. Jonathan's shaking his head like he disagrees with that.
Okay. I just want to make sure we don't skip over Scott here.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay. How's my delay? It looked like there was a long delay.
There's a pretty interesting delay on your voice, Scott. I could emulate it for you. No. Okay, so let's go to Jonathan, and maybe you could type it in, Scott. I don't mind reading it out.
Yeah, so I think the question isn't, do we pay attention to what Satoshi wanted to do or what he actually did? I think the question is actually, do we correct for Satoshi's mistake going forward, or do we go back and retroactively correct for the drift that already happened and try to undo the drift? So yeah, I think that like the question here is how we feel about rewriting history or undoing the thing that has already happened.
Okay, I'm going to move on to Scott's comment. All DAs I can think of to try. Oh, this went by fast. All DAs I can think of to try to get current solve time correct. There is no reference block. I'm not sure I read that correctly. Freetrader said maintaining a steady emission in terms of blocks per hour is stated in the white paper. And Jacob said, yeah, I was going to say what Jonathan's saying too, not really theory versus implementation, more two conflicting theoretical goals. And he commented to Freetrader, yes, but overall time or over future time, question mark. So who's got their hand up? Antony. Okay, let's go with Antony first, and then it'll be Josh
I
Ellsworth.
just have a question for, I guess, for everyone that maybe will help me understand the objections to it. I guess my question is like, do people object to it as in principle, like basing drift correction based on the genesis block or the magnitude of it? Like, so in other words, like say we had drift correction where it adds like 10 seconds to each block. Is that still a problem? Like, is it just the idea of basing it on the genesis block? And like,
so let's go to Josh first and then walk around with whoever else wants to answer that question. Josh.
I do think that's a good question. And there's just a little bit more context I wanted to put out there is that the main reason for, like, there was a couple of different reasons for his Satoshi's choosing of 10-minute blocks. And a lot of it was based on propagation, which to me makes it seem like it was a concern of the immediate block timings, not necessarily just the issuance schedule, which is already 100 years plus. So I don't think that I think either of these two algorithms is already putting us in a schedule where we're going to be releasing coins far after BTC runs out of coins. And we are already adjusting for it in some degree. So to Antony's point, yeah, that actually I think Assert already does that. It is a small drift. We're not going to be targeting 9.5-minute blocks anymore. We're going to accurately target 10-minute blocks, which is going to basically make our emissions slower than BTC already. And that contract, I think, is one that's easy to go through the community because we've already seen that contract a couple of times before. So I think that it's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to what seems like an arbitrary change. And I think that, in impact, it is a light change to go from 10 to 11 minutes. But the perception of that change is a big deal. One is, just trying to fix the immediate concern. And one is the illusion that, we can change the schedule in a more dramatic way. And when it comes to, your noob users, there is a small impact between, now we wouldn't be able to say, yeah, we have 10-minute blocks. When people are comparing Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, you're going to see a chart, and one's going to say 10, one's going to say 11, because for the next 5 years, it would be 11. And I'm not saying that's a big deal, but it is a perception difference, and it isn't a non-existent deal when it comes to people comparing the two coins. And it's something I just wanted to bring up.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to, first of all, go to Andrew Stone, who has had his hand up, and then Jacob after that.
Thanks. I just want to quickly say that in the history of Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin, this has never been a sort of hot ticket item. There's never been headlines about this. So, and we can't even agree here. So I think that we should do whatever is most elegant and simplest rather than, write code to solve a problem that has neither a market impact nor historically, nor, one that we can agree. We should solve this elegantly and in the simplest way and then move on to other problems. Thanks.
All right. Got Jacob next.
Yeah, just responding to Josh, I think something that's actually quite technically interesting that is probably worth understanding is ACERT, for instance, targets 10-minute blocks going forward, and I think it does it quite well under the assumption of steady hash rate. Like if hash rate increases dramatically, like it did in the early years of Bitcoin, then we would again see that like at any given moment going forward, the blocks would be on average about 10 minutes, but the average would tend to be a little bit under 10 minutes because the hash rate was constantly increasing, getting blocks a little faster than the algorithm expected. I think unless you have an actual like historical drift correction, like ABC is proposing, we will probably always end up with a block average slightly faster than our code expects, because I expect the hash rate to increase over time, at least a little bit.
Okay. I want to make sure that Freetrader's comments have got through. So Freetrader, if you wouldn't mind typing them in again. And then the next hand I had up was Jonathan.
Pass.
Oh, you're passing? Okay. The congressman relieves his time. No, just kidding. Who's next? Don't tell me we've exhausted this. Jason Dreyzehner, you want to read out your comment? You have to unmute yourself.
There it is. Yeah, I was just in response to what Antony asked. I don't have any strong objection, honestly, either way. It's just a slightly additional complexity when I don't really understand if there's value added. It seems like it's whether we're either going to have the 10-minute block times that are consistently from this moment on, or we'll be targeting the Genesis block. But it seems like it's only kind of a debate if you're looking at the code, honestly. Like from outside this room, nobody's going to care at all.
Okay.
So it's kind of a matter of what's simplest in these implementations.
All right. And Freetrader just said he has no active comments on the panel except for agreeing to keep it simple, stupid. Actually, he said KISS. So there you go. And Jonathan.
So riffing on what Andrew Stone said, this isn't exactly what he said, but I think that this is the thing that I would agree to. We should all fix the problem that we can agree about, and the problem that we can't agree about, we should try to work around it. We should try to find a way for that to not be a problem. And we can all agree that oscillations are a problem. We can agree that the variation in block time and the consequently high confirmation time is a problem. We can't agree that correcting historical drift is a problem. We can agree that preventing future drift is a problem. So I think that because there's a lot of dissent on the correcting historical drift topic, we shouldn't do it.
Okay. Other comments? Jacob.
So again, without trying to make, score any particular political point, but just as information that some people on the call probably don't have, or at least an opinion, a factual opinion that some people may not be aware of. Like having been involved in the DAA discussions in late 2017 and 2018, where we were talking a lot about this sort of exponential style of DAA, I see Amaury's point that, we're introducing a drift correction, a very, very short-term drift correction, in the sense that when there is a very short block, the assert DAA will push back in the other direction immediately. So we have some sort of immediate drift correction, like a short block. The algorithm tries to compensate for a very short block with longer blocks and vice versa. But the historical thing I want to point out is that, like, the fact that there is a sort of drift correction like that was never discussed. That is like an emergent property of the algorithm. The algorithm that we were coming up with was trying to make 10-minute blocks starting now going in the future. And in particular, I think to me at least, and I was involved in these discussions early on, the reason that you have this exponential style is really mostly just to try to have a reasonably accurate estimate of current hash rate. So it wasn't really, there was nothing historical about it. The only historical element of it is that the recent blocks historically, their times can hopefully give you some hint of the current hash rate, which is what you really want to need. And the purpose of the current hash rate was to make the next block average about 10 minutes. So just to understand, the Amaury is correct that it does introduce, I think he's correct that it does introduce a new drift correction sort of aspect that wasn't there before, but that was not like intentional.
Okay, Josh next. Sorry, Jonathan, I'll get you.
I was looking at questions from the audience, so I wanted to reply to Super Nerd about the focusing on DAA for now and revisit drift correction for another time. Unfortunately, that does mean that would be another event that SPV wallets would have to do updates. So I would prefer to try to fix this once more time and get it done and not have another disturbance in the chain. It would be wonderful if that is how it could happen and we could phase this and have more conversations about it. Unfortunately, that is very disruptive to the industry, and I wish there were other solutions, but I don't think of one that allows us to tier these fixes.
Thank you for bringing that forward from the questions.
Yeah, I would like to pile up on that.
Just a second.
Okay.
I want you to answer the question, but I just want to acknowledge that it'll be Jonathan and Antony after you finish addressing the question.
So I do address the question now.
Yep, please. Yeah,
so I would like to pile on. Some people have been saying that, oh, you know, like ABC has NEH syndrome because they don't want to change the DAA and they rolled out the broken DAA and yada yada yada. And the reason we've been reluctant to change it is not that, it's because it's super disruptive. It's about the most disruptive kind of hard fork that you can do because it affects way more software than other type of changes. And mainly the main things that you know change that position, I'd say, is the rise of stuff like assert, because it's really a step forward versus what have been done before. And so instead of like, you know, just releasing something that kind of like plays on the same trade-off and you end up with just like another point on the same bad curve where you make that aspect better and that other aspect worse, which is essentially the kind of trade-off that we had before. That was not worth it, because, you know, you can make the situation better with the specification where, like the specific situation we're in right now, but if the price ratio change or something else change in the future, then you may end up in a worse position with the same trade-off. But assert, like, it practically moved the curve somewhere else, I'd say, and it's worth going there.
Scott, just before we address you and the other people who have had questions, I did have a comment from Mark Lundeberg that he asked me to read out, so I think it's important to get it out now. To the proponents of drift correction, I hope you can lay out the pros and cons of drift correction, give your strong rationale for going with it, and also your reasoning for the precise parameters. This is what people are looking for in good leadership, to be open and to show that you understand all sides of the issue and have thought deeply about it. Drift correction should default to no unless there is a strong reason, simply because some accumulated drift has until now been a natural and widely accepted part of every DAA, even assert. A normal DAA reacts to recent hash rate changes in order to regulate future block times to a target value, and drift is a natural byproduct of the fact that the reaction is slow. drift accumulates in the situation of an ever-rising hash rate. Trying to fix past drift is not part of the normal DAA idea. It is a novelty. For Grassberg, not only do you have to justify the novelty of compensating the small drifts that will appear in future, you moreover also have to justify the novelty of retroactively declaring all past drifts as requiring fixing, which is what is going to lead to years of slightly slower blocks. Intellectually, this should be an uphill battle for the proponents. I just wanted to get that out because I neglected to mention it earlier. Because Mark's not here, I don't think there's any point in really talking directly to that. But next on my list of people.
I don't know. I think there is a lot of stuff in there, actually. This is very interesting.
Okay. Well, do we have agreement that we can address Mark's comments? I'd love to find a way to put it in the chat. If I can, I will.
So there is a lot of stuff that Mark asked for addressing that are worth addressing. There is a bit of an assumption in the question that need to be addressed as well. And this is that there is some side that is proponent of adding drift correction, and there is another side that is not a proponent of adding drift correction. But actually every single side that there is right now is a proponent of adding drift correction. And the question is about what is the reference point for that drift correction. It's not whether we do drift correction or not. Like every single proposal on the table, as far as I can tell, has some form of drift correction in it, either by design or emergent or whatnot. And this is why this question is not on the table, right? Because before, none of the proposals that existed had drift correction. And now we are in a novel situation where the different proposals that we have all drift correct in some way. The trade-off that there is, maybe Jonathan, you want to speak?
Yeah, I would appreciate it if you would distinguish between drift prevention and historical drift correction. I think that the terminology that you're using is ambiguous on those on that distinction, and I think it's an important one to make. That's all.
Well, okay. I think those are fundamentally the same. The difference between the two is the reference point that you pick. Whether you pick some block at some point and say like this is the correct emission schedule, or you pick the genesis block. But beside that, those are pretty much the same. So the pro and cons go, well, the cons obviously is that for a while, we're going to get slightly slower blocks. And that means that the confirmation time is slightly slower, and various points that have been made by Josh actually, so I don't think we need to reiterate that. Those points are correct. The flip side is that we demonstrate that we're committed to an emission schedule, and I think this is very important for hard money properties of the coin, because, well, you know, like the alternative is that we say that at one point in time this is correct, and we are picking that point in time, and we are deciding that this is correct, and the amount that we are talking about are actually quite big. I mean, we're talking about, you know, several months of coins emissions, so that's a big amount of money right there. And so the consequences against have been discussed by Josh. The consequences for is that first we can project very far in the future what block 8 correspond to what coin emission. We put ourselves where we don't have to decide on any kind of coin emission schedule, and so we don't put ourselves in the position of like a central bank of BCH that decide that, you know, like at this point this is correct, and we want to do that from there. So I think this is good. Also, because we reduce inflation slightly, it should probably be good for the holders, because, you know, there's just like less money that is dumped on the market, simply speaking, and so any holder should find a benefit there. Like reduced inflation is, I mean, like if we're interested in hard money, reduced inflation and hardly controlled inflation, don't, you know, infinitively downward in the future is a very attractive idea. So that's the pro.
So I'm seeing some text come up on the in the chat, and I just want to make sure things don't get lost. So before I take hands up again, Jacob, do you want to read your comment, and then I'll get Josh Ellithorpe to read his.
Yep, this came up before, but I'm just highlighting that I think one of the underlying disagreements here, an important underlying question is, which is more important for hard money, average block time since Genesis, like making that as close to 10 minutes as possible, or expected block time going forward? Because you do have to choose one or the other. There is no algorithm that will provide both.
Thank you. Josh Ellithorpe, and then I'm going to go to Andrew Stone. Sorry.
Mine was mainly on the point around the price, because the issuance schedule would be slowed down temporarily. That puts more of an onus on miners that want to get into Bitcoin Cash, where they're making less profit because someone else has gamed the system, which is not necessarily fair for the miners that come in, nor a choice that I think we should be making. And also the public perception of the speed of the coin also affects the investor confidence and also affects the price. So I don't buy that by reducing the amount of issuance by, a minute per block, that magically there's a price increase that goes along with that. It's a possibility, but I don't think that that's even remotely a guarantee. So I'd like to find other more like the hard money properties. Both of these algorithms do get us to the point of having an issuance schedule that is slower than BTC's, which means that whatever Satoshi had put in place, we are in the same ballgame no matter what. One gets us to where theoretically it could have possibly been the intent that it was 10 minutes. But maybe he knew that things would go out faster, and he said 10 minutes to account for the fact it could be 9 minutes and 30 seconds, but we can't talk to him and find out that information. So to me, it's about the consistency and, more importantly, documentation. So if I put out documentation about the block timings of BCH, I don't want to have 3 paragraphs about how the blockchain time is now 11 minutes, and in 3 years, it's going to be 10 minutes and 20 seconds, and in 2 years after that, it's going to be 10 minutes. Seems really confusing to me and to people that are operating the chain. And it seems that simplicity is really key. Not only the simplicity of the code for SPV wallets, but the simplicity of the contract as people read about the description of what we're doing with BCH.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to go to Andrew Stone now, and then I'm going to go back to the show of hands from other people.
Yes, thanks. It's ironic in this situation that by restoring the emission schedule to the exact 10 minutes, we're actually proving that we can monkey with the emission schedule arbitrarily. So I'm not really sure if restoring the emission schedule to the original actually meets the criteria of sort of proving something to investors. I think what it might prove is we can do whatever the hell we want. And luckily at this time, what we choose to do is something perhaps not bad. Thank you.
Good point. Jonathan Toomim's next.
There were some pros that Amaury mentioned that have an associated con that he didn't mention. For example, he was talking about the inflation and how current holders can benefit from having lower inflation. What's happening with the inflation is that current holders would benefit from a slower block time from reduced inflation, but they would also suffer because the increased slower block time, the slower block time would cause a reduction in the usability of the coin. That would reduce the value of Bitcoin Cash as a means of exchange. So the question becomes, from the holder's perspective, is Bitcoin Cash going to gain value more if it's useful or if it's low inflation, deflationary? And there's that balance there, and I don't think that he really addressed that. I'll stop there.
Okay, next I have Antony.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my comment might seem out of place now because I was trying to address something that Jonathan said like four times ago. Basically, he was talking about what do we do? What's the decision-making process here? If we don't all agree on something, what should we do? And I think this is probably one of the sources of a lot of the like a lot of the friction that's happened, because and this is why I was like urging him weeks ago to like submit the code to ABC and try to get the ABC devs involved in it, because like from the point of view, like it's difficult, like there's all these different people who have opinions, but from the point of view of Bitcoin ABC, like Amaury is the lead dev of Bitcoin ABC, and ultimately if there's different opinions on what should happen, like he has to make a decision. So I mean, in a way it's good now that we're all talking about this, and you know, he has this code now that he's working on, and it's had feedback from several people, including Mark Lunderberg and Joho, you know, so it's improving and there's ways to improve it. And maybe he will be convinced, you know, that there's different design decisions that should be made and stuff like that. But this, I think there's just like a fundamental kind of difference of like perspective on how things should work in that respect. So it's like we need, you know, that's kind of why I'm always like trying to say like, okay, we're like, it's late, like let's get ABC involved, because I want ABC to, you know, I don't want to have like people running off in different directions.
Okay, I have Scott who had something to say. You were going to suggest mud wrestling, was that right? No. Okay. So next in line, I have Josh Ellithorpe.
There's just one other thing I wanted to point out that I think is important just for the discussion. And I think that it's just a way of looking at these types of, you know, different viewpoints, right? People are coming from different viewpoints. I honestly believe that everyone cares deeply about doing the right thing here, right? And that we're trying to come up with as much data about these things. And one point I think is important is a perception of what it means to be a dev in Bitcoin Cash. And I think that has to be something about it. All of us know that we want to be able to attract more talent into Bitcoin Cash. And there are a couple of different mechanisms for developers that put forth a lot of work and research. And when they do that and something changes, it's hard for that developer, but there's also an upside for the person that is thinking that minor modifications are needed. Like I look at it as Amaury took something that Jonathan did that was good and made his changes that he thought were making it better. I honestly believe that. And so that's great, but the perception difference there is if a developer does a lot of work and research and simulators and all of that, and then presents it, and then that changes, then the perception we give the industry is no matter how good your work is, there will be last minute tweaks by these key people that control the coin. And that is a public perception that affects the entire project. And the other is someone does really good work, the discussion happens, and their work comes in relatively unchanged, but with a lot of conversation, code review, and the essence of what they did is able to make it into the project, which to me is a way to welcome the quality work of a developer. And there's pros and cons to both of these approaches, because a lot of times a proposal will come in that does need modification. And there's other times a proposal comes in that's really good that I would argue shouldn't be modified to make sure that the developer is appeased. So I'm not actually taking a side here. I'm making it clear that this is one perception difference and a concern moving forward as a community on how we welcome development efforts that come from the different nodes and outside developers and how we think about them and reason about them. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, that's a lot to be said, actually, Josh, because I think it's a fair amount of what the discussion has been, and people, non-developers like myself, are constantly being put on the spot to respond to development issues, which of course is ridiculous. So is there anybody else that would like to comment on what Josh has just said?
I mean, I'll basically agree with it. And this is why, I mean, this was kind of why I was saying, again, I guess I'll kind of repeat what I said. Like, I was worried about like the work that Jonathan did has had a lot of review and people looking at it and giving different feedback and so on. But that was all happening outside of ABC. So that's why I was saying like, okay, like let's get you know, Amaury and the other ABC guys involved in this feedback, because it's very awkward if there's this thing that's like developed with a bunch of people's feedback, and then it comes in at the last minute. And we're kind of basically at the last minute now almost. Like we're trying to like we should basically be like polishing off and working through all these details.
So Jonathan and then Andrew Stone.
ABC has always been able to view and review my code. It has been publicly posted. There's been nothing secret.
Okay. Do you want to address that now, or do you want to just move on?
Well, I mean,
I don't know. I'm just taking notes so I can address the different points that have been made.
Okay. So let Andrew Stone have his comment then, please.
I think that this is a whole separate meeting if ABC actually wants to work on being better at this task. But I'll just say one thing very quickly, which is, you know, a greater acknowledgement of the previous work done is probably, you know, very important. And in particular, in this case, for, you know, it to be branded as a whole new kind of algorithm at, you know, the outside, but then you look at under the covers and it's what Jonathan has been working on for a long time, plus some other stuff, you know, makes it look a little bit like a steal, whereas a different sort of presentation and branding might have made it look like, hey, just, you know, let's 1+ what Jonathan's done. Thank you so much for your contributions, and I'd like to make just a few changes to it type thing, right?
Anybody else want to comment on Andrew's comment? Okay. I don't know whether there's any kind of mechanism in place. I saw somebody put up the idea of a vote. I jokingly said, mud wrestling. Is this something that you want to move on from now, or do you want to address it in a more succinct way, come to some conclusion?
So I've took a few notes from what have been said by mostly Jonathan and Andrew, so I'd like to respond to that. Okay. The first one, I'm going back a bit, but you mentioned, like, you know, we are making a change that effectively improve inflation, but slightly decrease inflation, but also slightly decrease the property of a medium of exchange. And the question is, like, which is more valuable? And this is an important question, but we have to be honest with ourselves here. 10 minutes or 11 minutes in both cases completely busted as a medium of exchange. That's just like not good. And we've been relying on ZeroConf for small value payments and made some effort to make those as reliable as possible and work with that. And we have items on the roadmap to make sure that we can provide a higher level of security going down the road on very short time scale. But on longer time scale and for 1conf or 1+ confirmations, I mean, like 10 or 11 minutes is busted, like either way. It's just way too long. If you have 11 minutes confirmation time or 10 minutes confirmation time in both cases, you are just not a good medium of exchange. So yeah. So we are trading, like we are effectively trading like a property we know is good, we know improve over another property that we are so bad at that, you know, it's effectively not making it worse. We're just like we're not in the right category there. We're not even in the right time frame if we want to be a good medium of exchange. The second stuff is that ABC could have reviewed the code, and this is true, but like you got to realize that we have that tool from like 25,000 different people in the space that want us to review stuff, and you may see the tip of the iceberg of that happened publicly, right? But there are a bunch of people that want to deploy stuff on BCH that want us to have a look at it, and it's just like not something that we can realistically do with the kind of resources that we have. And And this is also not the way it commonly happens in the open source space. So let me take an example. Recently, there have been some ideas to improve uni-value. And actually, some of them came from Kalin from BCH, right? But none of those find their way into uni-value, right? Because Jeff Garzik is not going to look at BCHN and see what kind of change of uni-value Kalin is doing and expect that to be upstream, right? And this is why JSON packaged the change. So we had to modify the change a bit to match the style and the expectation of upstream, and then submit it upstream, and then go talk to Jeff Garzik to explaining why this is a good change, and eventually get that merged. And we had to change a few stuff because in that specific case, because we were using ++11 feature, and uni-value want to remain pre-C++11 compatible. But that's that's an example, but that's a general process of open source work. If you want some code to end up in some project, you have to submit the code to the project, and you have to talk to the people that maintain that project so that they merge it. Like there is very little way around that. The alternative is just not workable for anyone involved. And yeah, the last one is like, okay, this is bad presentation, and this is stealing and stuff. And well, I mean, yes, you can present it that way, but that's, I mean, like all those ideas, like the work from Jonathan is itself based on the work from Mark, which is itself based on the work of other people. This is all the things work, and this is how you move things forward. You take what exists and you improve it, and you make a new version of it, and you try to make things better. And I think that's good. And I think there is no attempt to hide that this is what happened, right? Like I'm just saying it right now. The work that Jonathan has done specifically to simulate RCERT and all of that is a big part of the choice that have been made, right? Because he was able to demonstrate that those kind of stuff perform well and have good results. And I don't think anyone is saying that this is like not valuable work that have been done by Jonathan. This is actually extremely valuable work done by Jonathan. But on the other end, I've seen so many projects where people get like super caught on to make sure that like all the names are listed everywhere, and all the hoops are jumped through and everything, and people got like very mad if this is not done the right way. And those projects tend to be like very slow and not make a lot of progress, because at the end of the day, you want to have a culture that is not about the people, but about the best result. That is really the most important. That is the most important part in all of this. It doesn't really matter who had a good idea. It matters that there is a good idea that we can implement.
Are you done with your list, Amaury? Yep, I'm going to assume you are.
It's been open for a while too. That might be related.
Sorry, could you repeat yourself?
There's a question that's been open for a while that might be related.
Okay.
From Kane, it looks like.
Okay, I know some people don't like the hypothetical questions since they aren't based in reality. Oops, somebody keeps dismissing the questions. Do you know who's doing that? It's pretty well got to be somebody.
In that case, it was a response that moved it to the answers. Before they were dismissed, but it's in the answers now. Just as Roberts responded to it. Yeah, I was wondering too. But
okay, I see what's happened.
It just happened at the right moment.
Okay, I know some people don't like the hypothetical questions since they aren't based in reality, but if we knew that users, investors didn't care at all if BCH has 11-minute blocks for 5 years, would you prefer to go back to the Genesis block and correct the historical drift, or would you still not want to fix historical drift? Scott answered, I don't know of anyone who wants to correct it in either case except Amaury. Hope you don't mind me saying that out loud, Scott. Anybody want to comment on that?
Seems like it's really a question for everybody but Amaury. If we did know, I think for me, in the hypothetical, even if we did know that investors didn't care, then it's still neither way. If we knew investors didn't care, then we know it wouldn't add any value. And so we wouldn't want to take the more complex path because they don't care. Our question kind of is whether or not people care about 10-minute versus 11-minute block times, or whether they care about targeting for the Genesis block. And I would personally, it seems to me that I highly doubt people care about targeting towards the Genesis block. People may care about the 11-minute block times. They prefer 10 minutes simply because it's a round number. But in general, I doubt many people outside of this group will care much about either. Okay. So it's kind of a matter of what's going to be simplest and easiest to implement across everywhere.
Okay. Josh?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. For me, if people didn't care, then it's about finding the simplest solution with the easiest libraries for the community that solves the immediate problem of these oscillations and gets us to a standard interval of block times at 10 minutes. I think that only if there's a known quantifiable reason that 11-minute block times needs to happen that can be described succinctly and not be something that can be easily argued, that we would add additional complexity for that. And to me, the idea of just like, this is better sound money, it's like, yeah, that's a theory. That's not an additional value on the coin or a proof that it's going to be a better thing to do. And I think that operational complexity is really difficult, and complexity builds on itself. And I prefer simpler solutions myself. And I have yet to hear an exact reason why us fixing that the issuance schedule since Genesis is a requirement that gives everyone value. I see a lot of trade-offs, pros and cons from that, and no tangible, like, this is just a win. This is absolutely good for this reason. And and when I see a situation like that, it's hard for me to go with a more complex solution.
Okay, I'm going to follow the pattern of hands up here. We're going to go to Jacob next.
I just wanted to note that some information that seems relevant to me that is getting a little drowned out maybe by the sort of principled and theoretical discussions is just the performance in the simulations. Like, some people put quite a bit of work into those simulators of different miner strategies over the last 3 years. Not me, like other people. And I think they've kind of proven themselves well. This was discussed on an earlier call. Like, a lot of the problems we have now were predicted by earlier runs of the simulators. So it's worth at least looking at how the different proposed algorithms perform under those simulations.
Okay, I think the next one that had their hand up was Jonathan.
I actually want to respond to what Amaury was saying a few minutes ago. Is that okay? Does anybody else want to answer this question first?
I mean, as long as we can remember the question after you say what you're going to say.
So Amaury said two things that I think are worth replying to. First, he was saying that ABC doesn't have the resources to review proposals from everybody. They don't have the resource to go out and review other people's proposals that aren't on reviews.bitcoinabc.org or whatever. I find it very strange that he would be making this point, given that they somehow found time to take 3 weeks to write their own difficulty adjustment algorithm, but they didn't have time to take 2 hours to copy paste my code over onto the Bitcoin ABC code repository. Like, there seems to be a pretty large mismatch there. And that doesn't seem to be like resources were actually the problem. It seems to be like resources is the excuse for them doing what they wanted to do anyway.
We'll let Amaury respond to that first, if you want.
Yeah, because there is a big misrepresentation of what we need to do. Like, when we take a proposal, we cannot just like copy the code and put it in the software and ship that. That's just like that's not something that we can do. If we If we take that code, then we need to run our own simulation, and we need to do like live activation and stuff like that, you know, on some network of nodes that we control and measure what's going on and all of that. We need to be able to do those stuff, and those stuff is actually what is time consuming, not copying a few lines of code.
Sure, but you have to do that in either case. And
yeah,
if you copy the code, then you don't have to write the code. So that was the 2 to 3 weeks. Like we already have some test cases. We already had the code. That could have saved you a lot of time if you just used what we'd already both written and tested.
I don't know. I'd argue that like understanding the code is probably the time-consuming part. So it's not clear to me that copying it would save that much time. Because Amaury basically had to figure out how like all these, and like, yeah, he asked you lots of questions which you answered and helped him understand and say like, oh yeah, ACERT is a good idea. So like that was a positive thing.
Jonathan, I want to make sure that your entire response to Amaury happens, and then get that out of the way so that we can move on to the other stuff.
And then the second point was about how 10 minutes is just too long. And because it's too long, it doesn't seem to matter if we make it worse. This argument reminds me a lot of some other arguments that I heard a while ago. The argument was that Bitcoin simply can't scale. And if we can't scale it to worldwide levels, then we shouldn't bother increasing the block size past 2 megabytes because it just doesn't matter. Another argument was Bitcoin is just too slow in terms of confirmation time. People can't wait 10 minutes. So we should just move everything over to the Lightning Network. And it doesn't really matter then if the base layer gets deprecated or the quality gets degraded. And I disagree with that category of argument. I think that we should always strive to make existing use cases which do exist no better than they are currently. And when possible, we should make those existing use cases work better. And we shouldn't just ignore the existing users because we hope to completely revamp the system in a few years with something that's going to completely fix everything. We have to make sure that both the existing legacy users are taken care of, as well as keeping an eye for the future and trying to do things that are an order of magnitude better.
Okay, guys, I'm just going to draw attention to the amount of time we've spent on this subject, and I don't want to slow down the discussion if you want to continue it, but we do have a couple of other things on the agenda that should be addressed. So what's your pleasure, gentlemen?
I think I should answer that though, because like this is it's just like core argument, and it's becoming kind of like the it's the Godwin point of BCH, like it's just like core. But we need to address it. This is not like limiting the block size because yada yada yada. This is not even in the same category, because we recognize that this is a problem. We recognize that this is worth fixing, and we actually have proposal on how to fix this. But we also recognize that the DAA is not where there is like enough room to be in enough resources to be tapped into to get us where we need to go, right? So I don't think it's a especially good idea, like, if you take a car and you're like, well, no, I want that car to go like at the speed of an airplane or whatever, like 1,000 miles per hour. It's just not gonna work. And you can always argue, well, like we can tweak the car in this way and that way. And no, it goes to 140 instead of 130. And so it gets closer to our goal of going to 1,000, but it actually doesn't. Like it doesn't get us any closer, because there is no path where we iterate over the car up to the point where it goes to 1,000 miles per hour in a reliable fashion that is usable by users. And so this whole goal that we need to make that car go to 1,000 miles per hour, and that making it like slightly faster now is somehow getting us closer to that goal is fallacious.
Let's go with Josh. I've got a couple of comments from Freetrader here as well. I'm going to just check with him and see if he wants these brought up now. But let's go with Josh Ellithorpe.
So I want to get away from some of the just like arguments about the types of problems. And there was one thing as a developer in Bitcoin Cash that was difficult for me that I wanted to bring up, which is it was very hard for me to do an apples to apples comparison of the two algorithms because the testing tools and the way they were simulated was not made available to me so that I could do my own comparisons of the algorithms. And I think that when developers put forth something that has a test harness that is already comparing a dozen different algorithms, that if there's going to be another algorithm that's brought to the table, we should be able to also use that same tool to be able to compare the two algorithms so that all the developers are speaking from a place of knowledge, and I don't have that knowledge. So I can't make an argument that one algorithm performs worse or better than the other, which is also a very pertinent point to this conversation that is missed because of the lack of a test harness that I can reproduce the findings that happened from the ABC team. So what I'm curious about is where was the disconnect there? Was there a problem with the existing test harness that has been comparing DAAs for 2 years? Or why wasn't that information made available so that we could make the most factually informed decision and be more prepared?
Just a second. Jonathan, could you stop sharing your screen, please? Thank you. Continue.
So I'm just curious about that as a developer because it would have helped me tremendously to be able to compare these more thoroughly. And I was blocked from being able to do so. And it impacts the amount of quality I can bring to this conversation.
Okay. Amaury, do you want to, or Antony want to address that? Because I think this is the back and forth that's been going on in public places. And let's get it all on the table here.
Yeah, we can address that. I think it's important for the various people who evaluate a proposal to do so with different tools, right? Because otherwise you can have something that is foobarred in the tool and then you like everybody compared the same foobarred result and you make a bad choice. So I think it's quite important. Like if some party is gonna take some work from some other party that have decision that is made based on the result of simulation, you cannot just like run the same simulator and expect something very informative out of that. So I think it's quite important that various parties use their own stuff.
So I agree, but I would say that would be a both argument, is that the community tools should be used and then you can augment that with your own tooling so that there can be a comparison between the tooling that's used to improve the tooling the rest of the community is using. It seems awkward to me that the argument would be to just ignore 2 years worth of multi-team development tooling and just consider it bad.
Is that in fact what's happened? Yeah,
that's why I'm curious because like it just surprised me that I didn't see it in the simulator.
Go ahead, Amaury.
I think Jonathan added it in the simulator since then, so the result should be in there.
I haven't pushed the new code to my repository yet, but I have added it.
Jonathan, I would love to get access to that branch or whatever. That would be useful for me. So thank you for doing that as well.
Yeah, in a day or two.
Okay.
All right. I'm just going to suggest that if the discussion on the drift is not going to come to a classic vote, that maybe we should move on to another item. Can I get just sort of a show of hands, those that want to move on to the other items on the agenda? Nobody wants to move on to the other items on the agenda?
I think this is the issue.
Are there any other? Yeah, I'm wondering it because it seems like it's just a question of values on this thing, and I don't feel like I fully understand the goal of historical drift correction because I'm usually on the side of sound money and stuff, but I don't feel like I fully grasp how this connects to sound money.
Okay, so maybe we'll stay here, but I do want to point out that the other items on the agenda are simply around, well, most of it has to do with drift. Freetrader has some concerns about unilateral announcements. I think we're addressing that in some way now. And then we would be talking about tests, what tests are done and still need to be done, additional research and so on. So maybe we're just on track and it is all around one major topic. So I'll throw it open again. Who would like to speak? Jonathan.
So Amaury said one other thing about the needing the code to be submitted to ABC and how the 3 weeks that they spent rewriting a different algorithm wasn't wasted. So he said that one of the reasons why that wasn't a waste of time was because they needed to understand the code. And I just want to point out that if in order to understand code, Amaury needs to write the code, that's kind of a problem for BCH because that means that in order for any code to be merged or included into BCH, it has to be either equivalent to or something that Amaury himself wrote, unless Bitcoin ABC is not BCH. And so I just wanted to point out that, that there seems to be an issue here in which any code that wasn't written by Amaury has a strong disadvantage because Amaury doesn't want to put in the time to understand other people's code.
I think I was the one who made that point, and the point wasn't that Amaury has to write it. It's just that when you said copying and pasting would take 5 minutes, I was saying, well, it would, like, it actually takes it. There's more to it than just copying and pasting.
2 hours is what I said.
Oh, okay.
That's what it took me to do.
Jonathan, can you make that a very specific question? Because I'm not hearing a question and I'm not sure where this
It wasn't
goes.
a question, it was a comment.
Oh, okay. Would anyone like to comment on Jonathan's comment?
Well, I basically just did, but I don't know if there's anything else to add.
Okay.
Just a question on some of the Bitcoin ABC stuff. Are people sending in, I'm just at curiosity, are people sending in like pull requests and stuff like in private? Like are some of these things that people are trying to get added to Bitcoin ABC, are they not in public forums where they can be reviewed by other people? Just to take
that's uncommon, but that happens.
Yeah.
But that's not how it happens usually.
Cool.
Most of the time stuff are public, but we received feedback from like about the difficulty adjustment, like, you know, in terms of direct stuff. So you cannot see that feedback in the code, but we have addressed a lot of it anyway. I mean, if it's good feedback, you gotta address it regardless of how it's coming.
Cool.
Yeah,
I'm
not sure what more there is to that. Like typically it's going to happen if this is a security problem. We're going to make sure that this doesn't happen in public. But otherwise, the default is that, you know, it's in public unless people who choose to do it some other way. But even then, the patch is usually submitted up in public anyway, unless, you know, they don't want to.
Cool.
But yeah, like they don't want to, I can imagine for security reasons. I don't think it happened for other stuff than security reasons.
Cool. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't like putting additional work on the plate that is not handleable, like that the community cannot help with. Because, you know, but we're good. I was just curious about that.
I'm not sure if we should be taking comments or questions from the audience yet. But one of the questions that has come up, is there a possibility of a show of hands as to who supports correcting the historic drift? Is that a bad question to ask at this point, or do we need more discussion?
I'd be in favor of a quick straw poll.
There's one.
How do we decide whether to have the straw poll? Should we have a vote on it?
Okay. So
Zoe seconded it, I guess.
No, I think he's giving us
whatever people want to do. I'm happy with doing it privately or publicly.
I mean, I don't think that's really how the decision should be made, so I don't think there's a point to it. But
yeah, I think it should be.
I don't really care one way or the other too much.
I don't think it's a binding decision, just a straw poll. It's just an assessment of this group's opinion, not necessarily binding for the whole BCH community.
it also kind of like oversimplifies because there's like a lot of assumptions. Like I'm kind of okay. I'm basically for it, but it depends. Like, what are we talking about? You know. Anyway.
Okay, Freetrader has something. I know a few other devs who also had a look and offered review comments and even patches. You need to read the code to write a specification, of course, if that's the order of things presented. I'm also in favor of the straw poll, just for the record. Well, I guess that sort of brings it up. Is there an agreement to have a straw poll? I mean, you guys are running this meeting. I'm just making sure you don't bite each other's heads off. Let's do it this way. Who doesn't want a straw poll?
Well, I think
I mean, we can do a straw poll if you guys want, but I think that's a really bad way. I mean, that's a recognized way to make by design decision. Like design by committee is definitively a term that is used in the industry for a reason. That's just like the wrong way to make decisions.
Has anybody's opinion on the subject been changed in the course of this meeting? Usually I like to joke that if you have to vote on it, then you're probably all wrong. But
that's been my experience too, Jason.
Yeah.
Crypto people with voting is just like usually not the correct way. But I do like the way you phrased it, Jason, on like, has anybody had their mind changed by the conversations that we had here? And if so, if you want to reflect on why you had that change, then I think that's a really pertinent conversation to have as to, you know, what, how people are thinking through this issue.
All right, well, we've got an official one here from Freetrader. He says, no, my opinion has not changed about drift correction. So I'll assume that I know what his opinion was to start with.
For me, I strongly appreciated Jonathan's work. I had not followed any of this for the most part, other than that I need to implement this in a JavaScript SVB wallet sometime in the next maybe 6 months, maybe 12, depends on what we come to here. So I definitely appreciate like thoroughly researched stuff. And I do think that like 5 years from now, it would be really, really awesome if most of the things that are shipping in, you know, in all of the clients and become part of the BCH chain were this thoroughly researched. I feel like this has been really awesome. But then other than that, I was very I don't care at all and didn't before this meeting. I thought I would have a better idea about what the value of drift correction might be. But I'm now less convinced that it's valuable, the historical drift correction. Just because it doesn't seem like there's any major pros right now.
Not sure who's got a phone ringing in the background. But, okay, Jason, you commented, Freetrader's commented. Anybody else want to comment on whether their position has changed or not? Yeah, I'd love to do Robert's Rules of Order, Zowie. That's a great idea. Boy, watch how fastly the gavel gets taken out of my hand if I do that. No, and I have run meetings that way, but this hasn't been something that's been chair dominated. I really want the people that are here to make some decisions. Thank you, Jacob. Do we have any is there anybody that would like to talk about whether their position has changed since they came into this meeting?
So my position hasn't changed, but the thing I was looking for in this meeting was tangible reasons that we would want to do it from the genesis, like a concrete one that resonated with me. And I realized that's a, you know, subjective and personal thing that I was looking for. And I realized that. And that's why I came, is I wanted to come in with an open mind as to like the pros and cons of each of these approaches. And I think that with additional technical sophistication of the solution, going back to the Genesis block, I needed a very concrete thing that I could resonate with on why that complexity was needed. And I have yet to hear something that satisfies that requirement for me. And that's what I was looking for. So I just want to set like my tone, what I was looking for, and why my opinion hasn't really been adjusted.
I'm going to throw it open for some of the people that have been a little bit quiet. If they want to make a comment, this is the time to do it. Okay.
Maybe I'll just jump in for a sec. I have to go in a couple of minutes, so maybe I'll just say goodbye right now, and I'll hang out for like 2 or 3 more minutes, but then I'll be heading off.
Did you want to give us your sort of final analysis, Antony, or do you think you've done that already?
No, I think I've already. I think I've already said what I wanted to say. So.
Okay. Can we go ahead and do that straw poll before you go?
I think it's been done. I mean, I think people are doing it right now. I appreciate that you're looking for a vote. I didn't get the impression that the group wanted to have a vote. I heard some people say they wanted to have a vote. Some people say they didn't. I'm not going to suggest for a moment that this is an impasse, because I think one of the things that's happened today is people have heard each other. And that going forward into what I believe will need to be a follow-up meeting. And it may be just a BCH Dev meeting, and I'm assuming most people here are going to be invited to that, coming up before the freeze date. So I'm not making decisions about what you guys are going to do. I just simply want to know, what would you like to do next? I'm not going to cut out the silence either when I do the other.
I'm going to just propose something, right? I think we all had a very amicable discussion talking about these different issues,
yep,
and that we should sit on them and think about them for a little bit. David, I appreciate you spearheading this and keeping the conversation open. That's really awesome. And I think we did have a really good conversation. And I don't think we need to leave this meeting with an exact solution. I think that it's good to let it resonate for a little bit. Let us have conversations between each other that are, as we have been anyways, and then have another meeting where we can discuss this. I think makes a lot of sense.
And I have to comment on how good you guys have been within the work group in terms of talking about actual issues and banter back and forth. And it's unfortunate that the rest of Telegram and the rest of Twitter doesn't see all the work that's actually being done by all of you. So, Jacob, did you want to say something?
No, I'll pass.
Okay. And Antony, did you want to wave goodbye to everybody? Okay. All right. With that in mind, if there's nothing further, shall we reschedule another meeting?
I would like to mention that in terms of testing and next steps, Freetrader has written up a spec for S33, formal spec. It's a draft, but I just wanted to let you guys know that you should expect that to be coming out soon. I didn't even know that it was that he'd done it. He just messaged me about it like an hour and a half ago. So next steps do include more testing. It includes a formal spec. We do need to have people read the spec and also read the 2 existing implementations to make sure that they are identical. It's a big problem when you have a sample implementation that doesn't match the spec. Then we can also start maybe making decisions.
Do you guys feel comfortable having another meeting in about a week's time? Anybody not want to meet again? Well, I think we'll schedule another meeting in a week's time. It's a Freetrader has just said it's unfortunate that Shama wasn't here as he's the work group chair. If anyone wants to help review the spec, let me know. And I think that's good. And that link will be made available with these show notes when this show is finally produced. I'm hoping it's going to be done soon, as quickly as I can. Any other final comments? Can I get a show of hands or at least a little bit of an indication of how you would grade this meeting? I used to do this all the time back when we were doing private meetings in 2018. But, how did I do as far as chairing the meeting on a scale of 0 to 10?
I honestly think you did a fantastic job.
Well, thanks, Josh. I'm not looking for compliments. I just want to make sure that I'm not.
You stayed out of the conversation, which is your role as the chair. You are self-admittedly not a developer, and you let the developers talk. That is the main purpose of the chair. So I appreciate just that. That's why I'm saying thank you.
Anybody that opposes Josh's viewpoint? No? Okay. Well, thank you for that. I'm just going to go with that. And thank you all for your time. And we'll look into setting something up in about a week's time. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.